Hello, how are you? So in my previous series of videos, we built up this customizable dashboard in Angular in the latest version 18, and we used Angular material. Now, some people suggested that I convert this into a draggable dashboard so that we can move around widgets using drag and drop. So I investigated just that, and in this video, we are going to create just that, and our final result is going to be something like this, where you can just pick a widget and you can place it in any of the places that you want, and the grid is going to animate and readjust itself according to the CSS grid that we have set up. And you can move things here, you can move things here, you can rearrange things in whatever way that we want. And there's a nice indicator on each of the widgets when we drag over it so that you know exactly where you are going to drop your or reposition your widget. Okay, so looks great. So how do we do it? Well, we use the Angular CDK drag and drop utilities. Now they're very powerful. I'm not using the typical use case here, but I'm going to use sort of a tweak to the original CDK drag and drop, but it ends up giving us the behavior that we need. So how do we actually start using the Angular CDK drag and drop utilities? So if you go to the drag and drop documentation in Angular docs website, in the material in the CDK section, you're going to see there's a long documentation here. I have to go through a lot of them to actually find out the properties that I needed to create the behavior that I wanted. Now, the basic concept is that you have a CDK drop list and you have a CDK drag. Both of these are directives which you can add to any element that you want. All right. So in a simplest case, we have this list, and this list basically this contains a lot of draggable items. So this list will be called the CDK drop list. So this will have a C directive attached to it. And then within that, whatever we want to drag, we are going to attach a CDK drag directive to it. And this is going to create this sort of behavior where it automatically sorts the list whenever we move around it. Okay. So this is a very nice and simple drag and drop method. But can we apply it to our use case? Now, I tried to use this way initially, the simplest way. And since this is a vertical orientation and ours is a horizontal or two-dimensional orientation, I tried this way of using the mixed orientation. If you look here, yes, something like this. So you can see there's a two-dimensional sort of thing. It's a flex wrap, I think, container. And you can see that it has the same behavior, but it is a mixed orientation. So you can move it in any direction here. Now, this looks nice, but in our case, in the case of a complex dashboard like ours, which has different sized widgets and which has a more complex layout, this does not give the behavior that we want actually. The reason is that when you implement the CDK drop list and CDK drag in this way, it causes sort of immediate DOM changes. And when you apply this to my customizable dashboard, you will notice that there will be a lot of flickering. There will be a lot of, changes in the layouts. And it's going to be very unseemly for the user to arrange things predictably. Fixed size items in a two dimensional, this works fine. But in our case, it results in a lot of glitches. Plus, it also triggers our animation because for each of the DOM changes, it triggers our animation. So if we use that method, it's going to result in a very messy sort of implementation of drag and drop, which will be very difficult for the users to use. Okay. So then what do we use? So then I started to investigate this a bit more, and I discovered that we could actually use a tweak, a sort of a creative way to use the CDK drop list to create the behavior that I wanted. And the crux of the matter is that instead of creating this whole thing as a CDK drop list, or in fact, this whole dashboard as a CDK drop list, let's create every widget as a CDK drop list. Okay. Now, the benefit of that is that it does not result in changing the DOM. Every widget is going to be a drop list, and it's not going to change anything in this structure, in this grid structure, till we actually drop a widget inside of another widget. All right. And the second benefit is that it will also allow us to highlight that specific widget in which we are dropping it, because it will be a drop list. So it will be a specific place where we are dropping our, or specific position in which we are dropping any of the other widgets, right? Because there are two reasons the CDK drop list approach seems like a better fit to me to create the behavior that I want. And you can see the behavior that it is very predictable and users can easily use it to reposition these complex and different size widgets on our dashboard. All right. So how do we do that? Let's get started. Okay. So as I said, the starting point will be that each of the widget here is going to be a CDK drop list. we are going to start from the previous point that we left in our tutorial series, in the previous 3-part series. Now, if you want to watch that series to come up to this point, you can actually go to the playlist, and I'm going to link the playlist in the description. Or if you want to get the complete code yourself, you can also get it from my shop. The link is also in the description. All right. So our starting point will be the ending point of the last video, which was that we had a dashboard, customizable dashboard, where we could move the widgets, but we could only use this method. That is, we can only move to adjacent positions. We want to add drag and drop so that it becomes easier for the user to reposition the widgets. All right. So how do we do that? Let's go in our code. And if we go in our code, we have a div, which is a containing div of all of the widgets. And then we have a for loop, which loops through all of our widgets and it arranges it into a grid. All right, using this styling. So the first thing that we discussed, that we want to make our widget, each of the widget as a CDK drop list. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import drop list here. Okay, and it imports it here, and you can then add this CDK drop list to each of the widgets here. All right. Okay, so this CDK drop list works, but what we want is that we want to allow a widget to be dropped into another widget. Now, to do that, we need to connect these drop lists together. All right. Now, how to connect it? Now, there are two ways. We can add a CDK connected to a parameter to each of the drop lists. But since we don't know the number of widgets or the number of drop lists in advance, because we can add and remove widgets as well, we can do an easier way, which will be to import a CDK DropList group here. Okay. Now, CDK DropList group makes sure that all of the CDK DropLists within that container are going to be connected to each other, so they can be dragged and dropped into each other. All right. So we're going to also import this. We want to declare our draggable instances. So our draggable instances will be within the widget itself. So let's go in the widget, and in the widget, you can see the container. We are going to make this into a CDK drag. All right. Great. And let's import this CDK drag here as well. Okay. Let's save this and let's try this out. Now, when we try to drag this, you can see that we can drag this really nicely, but you can see that there is a problem. It's not the behavior that we're looking for. Now, what's happening here is that we are trying to drop this container within this widget, which is also drop list, into another drop list, which is our subscribers drop list here. And because it is treating it like a drop list, it's sort of displacing the original content and putting these views on top of it. You can see the subscribers part is pushed to the bottom and the views part comes on the top. So by default, the Angular CDK is basically putting this placeholder inside of the drop list as it should. All right. But we don't want this behavior. We just want to show that we are dragging something. We want the original widget drop list to remain the same before we actually drop it. So what do we do for that? Angular CDK, it provides a drag placeholder directive that we can use to override this placeholder that we have. Okay. So the CDK calls this, if you go in the documentation, you can see that it calls it the drag placeholder component. So we need to override this CDK drag placeholder directive. Now, how do we do that? Let's go in our widget component where we have the CDK drag, and within that CDK drag, we can add another div here. Okay. And this drag is going to have CDK drag placeholder. Okay. We need to also implement this, import this here. Okay. And we can add anything here, but in our case, we don't want anything here. We want it to be empty so that it doesn't cause any displacement in destination drop list. All right. So let's save this and let's try this out. And now you can see that there's no displacement because the placeholder is empty. It doesn't cause any displacement and the widget remains the same. The second behavior that we want, which we saw in the original list, was that we want the containing drop list to actually change its appearance so that we know where we are dropping this widget. And also notice that we also have a nice border on the left side to signal to the user where we are actually going to insert this, the position that we are going to insert this widget. All right. So how do we do that? So for that, if you go in our documentation for the drag and drop, you can see that they specify some styles here, which they say that the CDK applies to different elements based on their current status in the drag and drop behavior. All right. So here we have CDK DropList, CDK drag. We have lots of classes that are applied. What we're interested in is the class called CDK DropList dragging. All right. Now, so this class means that when we are dragging something and we are about to drop it, on top of a CDK drop list, this class is going to be applied on that drop list at that time, right? And this is exactly what we want. Let's copy this in our global styles. Let's add CDK here, and within that we are going to change the opacity a bit to 0.5 here. All right. So now when you go back to this and you try to drop this, you can see that we have this nice opacity change to signal to the user that, okay, we are going to drop it here, but we also want to add a border on the left side here. So we're going to do border left and we're going to make this a bit bigger. So we're going to do 5 pixels and we're going to do solid, and the border we're going to give a black color of 0.5 opacity. And then we also want to give a padding so that there's some space between the widget and the border so that we can see the border clearly. So let's save this and let's see how this looks. And now when you drag this, you can see that we have this nice indicator on each of the drop lists when we want to add it. Great. So this behavior looks nice. Now you'll notice another issue here, that when we drag this, you can see that our widget basically has hard borders, not the soft border radius ones that we have in our original widget. Now, why is that happening? So upon some investigation in the document, you will see a section drag preview insertion point. Now, so this div, which appears when you're dragging something or dragging that, is actually called the CDK drag preview. And it says that there are some options available for the drag preview insertion point. So by default, what happens is that this draggable thing is basically part of the body of your application. And that's done to avoid some Z index or other styling issues. But you can actually change that. So the default is global, but we can also change it to parent. Now, parent is going to add this element to the parent of your draggable component. And this is going to ensure that you will get all the inherited styles from the component. And that is exactly what the problem is. Because if we go in our widget component here, you're going to see that we have a host with a border radius of 16 pixels. And this container is basically what we're using for the draggable preview. So this container has a border radius which is inheriting from this host here. Okay, so if we make it into parent, then this is going to inherit it fine, just like we have it in a normal. So let's add this property here, and this property is called CDK drag preview container here. Let's copy this and let's paste this here. And this preview container is going to be parent instead of global. Let's save this. And now when we try it out, you can see that we have those nice rounded borders and everything else works as before. All right. The last visual tweak that we need to do for this drag and drop behavior, is already looking really nice, is to just add a sort of cursor indicator here to tell the users about whether we can move it or not. Okay, to just give a visual indication to the users. And for that, we are going to go in our widget header here. And within that, we're going to make cursor as move. Let's save this. And now you can see when we move this on the header, basically you can move anything, but just to indicate to the user, we are going to highlight that, okay, you can move the header here so that we can do that. Okay, so visually this drag and drop looks really nice, but you can see that when we drop it in any of the positions, you can see that nothing happens. And that is because the CDK drag and drop list and drag, these basically do only the work of visually changing your list to show a drag and drop behavior, but the implementation or what would be the final result after the drag and drop has to be implemented by you on your data yourself. Okay, so let's do that ourselves. So for that, we can actually go in our dashboard component here, and for each of our widget, we can add a CDK dropped event here. Now this event is fired whenever you drop any CDK draggable instance inside of a drop list. Now since each of our widget is a drop list, this will work perfectly for our use case. Okay, so we'll add a function called drop here, and we'll give a dollar event inside of it, which is the meters that we get from CDK DropList. Okay, so let's add this drop here. Yeah, we can go in our CDK DropList here, and we can see in our output here that we will have CDK DropList dropped here, and the type is CDK drag drop tne. So we are going to make it CDK drag drop tne. All right. So CDK drag drop, and it's going to be, now T is basically your data that you attach to this, the drop list itself. Okay. So in our case, we are going to send in the widget ID. We are going to do that in a bit, but here we are going to specify the type of this, and then we can do any here. All right. Great. So our event has the correct type. So the problem here we are dealing with is that how do we actually know that which of the widget is being dropped here? because then we would want to move that widget to this position and then change the current widget to the other position. So how do we identify that? And now it's a bit difficult to get it just from the view itself. So what we're going to do is that we can actually attach some data or some identifiers to each of the drop list here. So in our case, we can use attached. So we're going to say CDK DropList data. And in the data, we are going to send in the widget ID so that we know which widget is being moved here. All right. Now in this event, then we get basically two things. We get our previous container. Okay. I think it's the container only. Okay. So if we go in this event, we're going to see that we have the container and the previous container. All right. So we then need to create a function which we can call as update widget position. All right, and we're going to send two basically parameters to it, and the first one will be our previous container dot data, which will be the widget ID of the source container, the source widget, and then we'll have the container dot data. All right, and you can see that we have an error here on the update widget position because we don't have this function yet. So let's go in our dashboard service and let's implement this function here. Okay, so let's add the update widget function and let's do update widget position, and it will have two parameters. The first one will be the source widget ID and then the target widget ID, right? And then the first thing we need to do is the source index. This will be the added widgets, and we're going to find the index within that using the source widget ID. All right, then as an added check, we are going to check if the source index is equals to -1, and we're going to just return it if that happens. Okay, now, the next thing we want to do is we want to take out this source widget from this specific index. But before that, we're going to create a sort of a new immutable copy of the added widget so that we can propagate the changes correctly when we set the signal to it. So we're going to do new widgets and we're going to spread the old widgets on it. Then we're going to assign a source widget variable to the new widgets when we splice it, and we're going to slice on the source index. We're going to just take out one of them and we're going to assign it back to the source widget. Great. Okay, now let's move on to the target widget. So the target widget, which is the target index. Now here we're going to not use the added widgets, but we're going to use the new widgets because when the source widget has been taken out of the widgets is going to change the structure of it. So we want to find out the latest index of that target widget. So let's find the index here by doing this, and we're going to check for the target index again, whether it's -1. I'm just going to return it if that happens. But if we don't have that, then we are going to simply insert the source widget that we have here to our new widgets in the target index position, and we can use the splice function for that purpose as well. So let's do that. New widgets to target index, and this 0 means that we are not going to remove anything. Instead, we are going to add the source widget in that same position. All right, great. And in the end, we are going to just set the added widgets to this new widgets. So let's save this and try this out how this looks. So now when we drag this in a position, for example, before watch time, you can see that revenue is shifted here and revenue shifts here and revenue can also go back here. Okay. So this works fine, but you'll notice that when we position this right before views here, it doesn't do anything. And in this position, what I want is that I wanted to swap the positions of the widgets because that seems like a more natural way of interaction for the user. The user might get a bit confused with this. So to do that, we just need to add a new condition here, and let's create a variable called insert at here. And here we're going to check whether the target index is equals to the source index. Now remember that the target index is basically the index of the target widget after the source widget has been taken out. So if they're adjacent widgets, then they're going to be equal. So we're going to do target index and source index are going to be equal. So if they're equal, that means they're adjacent. So in that case, we want to swap their positions. How do we swap the positions? We're going to do target index +1 instead of the target index. Otherwise, we're going to do target index, all right? And in this target index, then we're going to do insert at. All right, now you can change this behavior according to what you want for your behavior. Now, this is just something that made sense to me as a natural way of interaction for the user. Okay, let's save this. And now, if you drag this here, you can see that it going to swap this thing nicely And let's say we go in channel analytics. Let's say we want to put it before this. Let's say we want to put it here, here. So you can now see that our behavior is a bit more intuitive, and our users are going to enjoy using this. And now you can use it to any end. You can change the revenue position here. You can even change the size here for this and move this around to whatever place you want. Maybe put the revenue top here again. Maybe you want to move the channel analytics here, and you want to increase the size of the traffic sources. You want to move the ideas for you here, maybe. So it all depends on what you want to do, and you can now change the position of the widgets any place on the UI while the grid naturally adjusts itself to its normal state. All right. And you'll also notice one thing. You'll also notice the animations, and you'll notice that we did not do anything for the animations. They're just automatically added. And why is that? Because as soon as the DOM changes, when we drop the list and we change the list positioning, the mutation observer API fires, which actually causes the animation to fire as well using the animate CSS grid package. All right. So great. This is the behavior that we want. And as you can see, the Angular CDK provides a lot of flexibility, a lot of parameters, which once you get to know them, you can use them for any kind of drag and drop behaviors. And now if you want the code for this whole dashboard, it's available on my shop. You can get it from there. It also includes the sidebar here, which is also nested. I've not shown this here, but it has a nested sidebar using recursion. The link to that is given in the description. And if you like this video, you can hit the like button. You can drop me a comment. And also, please make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because this helps the channel to grow and it helps me to reach more people and help more developers build such cool things. Okay. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time with another interesting video.